So today, and I can't quite believe this, I'm with historian and I would say superstar historian, actually, Dan, and initiator of History Hits, the history TV channel, which I think is amazing. And why did you say yes to doing this, Dan? Can
I
I
said
ask you?
I said yes to this because do you know what? I'm a big admirer of yours, obviously, and I am kind of keen to explore fashion and what I wear because the older I get, you know what? I think as I'm losing my youthful, the body and the face that came with the package, right?
Yeah,
As I'm losing that, I'm more aware now of what I need to put on myself and around myself, and of kind of building that identity. Whereas I think my identity in the old days used to just be like young, healthy person, and
yeah.
and I was lucky. I guess I was lucky. So, and now that's kind of going, and so I'm kind of really interested now in fashion, and just being more thoughtful about it.
That is so interesting. And as a woman who's kind of been involved in the business of helping women and some men self-esteem through clothes, I've never thought of that. I've never thought that, and that's exact. Although I'm a lot older than you, it's exactly what I've been going through. You can't rely on jeans or the fact that you run 10K because that doesn't have an impact anymore. And so you do, and I've been doing the same. You have to reevaluate and you have to rely more on clothes.
Exactly, and so I I went through this very odd. I'll actually never forget it. I went through this. It was like a 6 month period when I was 15, and I woke up. I went from being this skinny, weird, giraffe-like, prepubescent, like friends, school friends. I like everyone used to joke about how like ugly and weird I was. School friends, yeah, great friends. Anyway, and school people, associated people at school. And then in the space of 6 months, I kind of had this. My body just transformed, and I remember every night. I didn't have a mirror in my room, but I looked at the double glazing on my window, and I saw this guy with a six pack, and I was like, "Who is that? What is happening here?" And it was the most exciting transformation I've ever obviously experienced, and it's one that changed my entire life. I went from being a total loser to being on the first 15 rugby in the space of a year, and then I got all these new friends, and for 20 years from that point, all I had to do was put a pair of jeans on and a t-shirt, and I kind of I looked good. Like I didn't look fashionable, but I looked good because I just had this it was all good. Now that's not true anymore, and so I'm kind of I'm coming to terms with that.
Yeah. Well, it's like you've always had you've had the framework, and now you got to rely on the upholstery. But it's interesting that you say that. I mean, so do you think you have more friends because of the way you look? Do you think you gained
Yeah,
more friends?
I
Because you
did.
just
No,
said
I'm afraid
that.
to say. I think it could probably my own confidence.
Yeah.
I had it was a transformative period yeah, because I became I think teenagers are, and goodness me, I'm sure now times a million. But when I was growing up, that we were we were we were drawn to physical beauty, weren't we? And we were
Yeah.
kind of scared a little bit by d- d- you know think by ugliness, and we were all terrified about our skin, and we
Yeah.
felt that like what was going on our surface was a reflection of our inner being, which you then
Yeah.
spend 20 years unlearning that.
Yeah.
And and so I did, I have to say, it was, but I maybe because I became so much more confident, because I was like, oh my god, this is, I sort of now feel like the person I thought I was inside, and now other people are
Yeah.
going, oh, you're a confident, big, tall, strong young man, and
Yeah.
yeah. So I have to feel like I do think my social transformation was connected with my physical growing and transformation.
Yeah. So for you, it was like you felt really confident about your body, and so you just threw anything on it, and you felt your body, and your height, and your frame, and your face did the talking, which is actually the total antithesis of what most teenagers feel. I certainly didn't feel that. I was always trying to disguise my body, or I was very, very skinny, or change the shape of myself. So I'd wear 5 layers of thick tights under my jeans, even in summer, to make my legs look fatter. So actually, you got a get out of jail card in your teens.
Well, I did get a get out of jail card, and that is also because of the essential misogyny, structural misogyny of the society we live in, which is that there's obviously several things going on there. And by the way, we could talk later on about my lack of needing to have fashion. I've worked alongside many female presenters, and I've been astonished, by the way, by how we have had to both approach what we wear on screen, and perhaps we can talk about that later on. So I do think it's the fashion, the expectations, the misogyny around young girls and women is mind blowing. So in your case, it was your legs need to look fatter. In another generation, it could have been they need to look thinner or longer or shorter, or whatever it might have been. For me, there's a hetero normative sort of expectation that just a young man needs to be square jawed and skinny waisted and wide shouldered. And I was very lucky in that respect. I did like the 90s were a weird time for fashion. If you look back at things like Brad Pitt and Fight Club and stuff, it was a time of like, it was quite my friends were wearing quite vintage clothes. It was Oasis, and I actually looked really stupid. If you're 6'5" and 105 kilos, you actually look quite stupid in those clothes. Like you.
Yeah, so, no, I was just going to say that. With the little pork pie hat and.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a kind of twin. I had a twin thing. Is one, I didn't feel I needed to be fashionable because I was lucky, as you said, I had the frame, so I could put some jeans on that were roughly the cut that people were wearing at that point. I could put a t-shirt on with the right word on it, no fear, or whatever it was back in the 90s, right? and I could get a buy, and that was like, and I got people teasing me, and then I ended up wearing a lot of kind of. That was a time when it was quite unusual to be that tall. It was before the internet, right? So it was hard to clothes shop, and I ended up wearing a lot of preppy American stuff, like East Coast frat boy, Ralph Lauren, because you could buy those like chinos and those shirts off the peg in the UK, and that was quite unusual. I lusted to wear unbelievably. I wanted to like Liam Gallagher, but I kind of didn't. And it was without going to extreme measures and like tailoring. I that was not an option for me. So my fashion became sportswear, t-shirt, jeans, trainers, and I've kind of never grown out of that in a way, and I regret that. I've had a very boring life in fashion, and so part of it is probably my own innate conservatism. Part of it was this weird start I had, and part of it was just it's difficult as a guy who's enormous to wear those fashions.
But so, did you have a genuine interest in fashion? I do find that quite surprising.
Yeah, I think I did, because despite the kind of projecting the confidence of a rugby playing, deeply privileged, square jawed 18-year-old, you're always deeply insecure deep down, right?
Yeah.
You're always looking at other people. You're always thinking, God, the way that person's wearing that stuff is so cool. I can never. Yeah. I knew that I was already like you date a new girl and she'd take you to a gig and her friends would look at you like you were a total idiot, like you were just a West London
total
muppet, like a total. And I was like, oh my God, I'm in Brixton. I'm going to like this, I'm going to like this kind of electro night, and I'm fucking wearing Ralph Lauren. So I was very aware of that.
Yeah.
And then historically, of course, I'm very conscious of fashion. Very aware of fashion. I'm very aware that, I maintain living in a world of like unimaginably bad male fashion compared to the 17th century or the 18th century.
I totally agree. But do you think that, has the sort of misogyny always been there? Like, if you look back in history, have men, always kind of, of course, men dressed as peacocks and they took far more care with their wigs, their clothes, their lace, everything else. But do you think men have always looked at women as objects going back through history, and so the women have to portray themselves as these kind of bedecked, bejeweled creatures?
I think there's like my head's now full of sort of conflicting evidence. Of course, if you look at Queen Elizabeth I, the way that she paid excruciatingly close attention to how she appeared. At the same time, of course, men did, as you say. Talleyrand, who was the French foreign minister at the Congress of Vienna, got up hours before he had to put his makeup on in the morning.
Interesting.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
I suspect. I do suspect the camera. I do suspect the art, the superficiality of an age in which we're capturing images and sharing images it must put even more pressure on appearance.
Yeah.
Of course, it does. and perfection.
Does it though? But does it? If
Well,
you
no,
look at
but also we're presented constantly with now images of perfection. So people, you knew, and even back, we're talking mass media. I'm not even coming on to the kind of social media phenomenon, but like when I was reading FHM, everyone I knew, we knew every like dimple of
every
Kylie's butt
pair
cheek,
of tits
right?
in
Exactly.
the business.
So I do think it was hard, even back then to like, and when I first girlfriend, she came to my room, and I still had my I still had my 15-year-old posters up on the wall of like FHM, like Pamela Anderson, and she eventually after about 2 months was like, it's a bit weird. And I was like, what? She's like, it's a bit weird being in this room and like having these kind of, and I was like, oh, I didn't really think about that. But the answer through history, I think that there's probably competing evidence, but I'm sure it has always been enormous difficult. I do wonder. Yeah, and I was just reading a book actually about the 12th century, and women were constantly referred to by their looks even back then. So like they're arranging these marriages between Henry I's kids and European princesses, and by all accounts, she's a very beautiful, a very pretty, very beautiful person as well. So I do think that's probably
and it's kind of like if you think about, I mean, then back in the sort of in the, let's say, Elizabethan times, the amount of work and time and effort in embroidery and beading and lace making that it took to be presented at court or to go to a ball, whatever it was so extreme. So we don't have that today because everything's instant. But then maybe what's replaced it today is all this fucking, excuse my language, cosmetic surgery, Botox, etc. So it's not what you wear that women and young women especially are changing. It's that actual physical being that they are having, sort of beaded, injected, changed, sewn. It's not the clothes anymore. It's their bodies.
Well, there is a kind of school of thought that says the Industrial Revolution, right, starts 200 or 300 years ago, and it was about objects, it was about the things around us. So it's about, you can flick a light bulb on, and then it's a Hoover, and then it's a car, and then it's and if you think about it, the objects almost got closer and closer to us and now the next Industrial Revolution is actually it's the smart chip.
True.
It's the smart chip in the brain. It's the changing your face. It's the changing your genes. You're building your muscles. So it's actually that process has gone from the things around us, the things that carry us, transport us, to utility things in the home, to things right inside us, changing our very nature. So
that is so true. And do you have? Obviously, I so firmly believe that a knowledge of history helps us project what's is going to happen in the future to a certain degree. But are you as much interested in the future of history in the making and what's going to become history as you are in the past?
Yeah, that's the weird thing about people who slag off historians. They think that we're all like weirdly obsessed with just dead people.
Yeah.
And the reason we love history is because we're totally fascinated by the future and the present, and history is where that all comes from. Whether we like it or not. So I get up every morning. I cannot wait. History, particularly, it's fascinating. The older historians I know, I interview these guys, men and women in their 80s and 90s. They are so fascinated by the world because they know where this stuff comes from. Oh, I see. There's trouble in Belarus. Their president's under. Well, of course there is, because if you look back 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, you can see that all building, and then it comes to pass. And I am so fascinated to know what happens to Donald Trump in November. I'm more fascinated than anybody I know, because you've studied the history of racism in America.
Yeah.
You've studied the history of elections in America, of isolationism, of presidential quirk and criminality. You cannot wait to see who the next one will be. Whether the future belongs to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the progressives, or whether there is this swing back towards an older, whiter, slightly more racist, very much more racist view of America. I'm obsessed by that.
And do you have that on? Because you have an amazing podcast. You've done 500 episodes, and then you have your HistoryHit channel too. So do you discuss that as well, the future? Because to me, like you said, that is what it's all about. That really cements the importance of history, I think, especially for the younger generation.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. And for me, it should always be rooted. So it's interesting. My journey was that my mum and dad were both journalists, right? Dad was at the BBC, mum was at the CBC. She's a Canadian correspondent in London. Our discussions around the breakfast table was their job. Their job was They went up to Hillsborough when the disaster happened up there. They went out to Iraq, Saudi Arabia when Iraq invaded Kuwait in '91. So that I was like, wow, the world is so fascinating. These people, mum and dad, are involved in this. But inevitably, they're like, well, why did Saddam Hussein just invade Kuwait? Well, we had to back in the day before the internet. Bang, books came out on the table, history. Oh, right, I don't know. This is where it comes from. He's claiming it was always part of Iraq. Was it? Well, that's a bit controversial. So for me, my journey into history was always what's going on today. How on earth do you understand what the hell is going on in America? How do you understand what's going on with Brexit without working out what has gone before? So you're absolutely right. It's always rooted in the present. And the same's true of fashion. Like I just find when you look back at what people have worn, how they've tried to present themselves, the importance. So for example, today we've got this weird situation because we have a slightly more democratic society where posh people and people in power, I'm thinking of Dominic Cummings here in the UK, dress as scruffily as they can.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of making a statement. Whereas in the old days, as you pointed out earlier, with the beadwork and the sewing up and the pulling, the corsets, you dressed because you wanted to, because only the elite had power. You wanted to show that you were in the elite. So everyone was dressing up. You think of the Artful Dodger and Charles Dickens. They're all actually dressing like little gentlemen because they're trying to kind of haul themselves up. Now, everyone dresses. David Cameron there in his jeans and his Converse, and they're all trying to do the opposite. And that tells you about power and where it lies and perception. So I find all that stuff fascinating.
Oh my God, you need to do a book on this, and I'll help you. I think it's genuinely, I think it's so fascinating, the history of fashion and how it's led us to where we are today. Not so much kind of individual designers or anything, but the kind of, the sort of the psychological approach to clothes is so fascinating. So when you were growing up, you said you were a geeky little, well, not so little, but you wore T-shirts. You had your Gap T-shirt was like the one thing that kind of you took through how many years? Like 6 years or something?
Like I had this terrible thing. My mum, I was the oldest of my mum's kids, and I think she dressed me like deep into my early teens. And I don't know why, but she would dress me in she was Canadian, and there were all these like Canadian designers like Marcy Lippman and stuff, and there was and then there was Naf Naf. Do you remember? My mum loves bright clothes. So I was like this big, I was a big, unconfident, skinny kid wearing like my mum's choice of clothes, like deep into my. And then eventually my mates took me to Gap. I'll never forget, we went to Gap together, which at that time was like high street, and it was you could be quite anonymous as a teenager wearing that stuff because it was just, as you remembered, like completely like a sort of, you just hide in plain sight when you're wearing it.
It was just a universal look, wasn't it?
It was a universal look, and it was safe.
Yeah.
It was super safe. And I could actually, depressingly, this is how traumatic the early years are, man. I could tell you what I bought. I bought like a grey, there was a zip, and it was a long sleeve top with a little zip there, and I bought some white T-shirts, and I bought some jeans, and I wore those every day for the next 2 years. And I'm to the decision, my mum and dad gave me the best start in life, but the one thing I'm doing for my kids is I'm going to help them perhaps have a bit more adventure and a bit more excitement in their wardrobe and give them a bit more freedom, because and it wasn't my mum's fault. She didn't know it. She just had no, just wasn't something. She was a busy, unbelievably, she was a working mum, like amazingly impressive. But that transition, I still remember that shopping trip. That's how important that stuff is.
But so do you think, rather than your wife, you're the person to give your children clothing advice?
No, I think we talk about it as a family a lot more. I mean, again, my role is very different to my dad's role, a generation before, and I'm sure that's true of lots and lots of parents, lots of men out there. Still, we haven't come far enough, but we are a long way.
A long way.
And so I think, I mean, if anything, we like going shopping as a family, and I love, and also the internet is amazing. So we choose things together on the net, and we find fun things to wear as a family. They're still young enough; they quite like novelty things. So they're
How old are they?
My kids are 8, 5, and 4.
Okay.
So we have good fun with that. I mean, I'm just kind of aware that the opposite. I just don't want to go too far the other way and turn them into little kind of clothes, go crazy and have wardrobes.
I think it's just letting them, just going with the flow. I mean, you just got to go with it. I mean, my youngest daughter, she would wear. I remember once we were going up to London, and she was only about 6. She arrived downstairs. She'd wrapped her entire face in cling film, with two little holes for her nose, straws coming out, and a little mouth. A cowboy hat, patchwork skirt, kind of little, I call Christy Brown. Do you remember Daniel Day-Lewis and My Left Foot? I don't know, he always wore these little kind of tank tops. Patchwork skirt, jodhpurs, and gold tap shoes. And I took her up to London like that.
Amazing.
And it's just gone from there. Just let them do what the fuck they want.
It's so wonderful when they express themselves through clothes. We went to the Natural History Museum once, and just as we were leaving the house, my little daughter, about 5 or 6, she just put a pair of those lovely butterfly wings, those sparkly butterfly wings on her back. She just went, right, hang on, we're going down to go to the museum. I'll just wait a sec. I just need to get there. I was got keys, right? Oyster card, and then she was just like, oh, hang on, strap them on and just walk around London all day. And I thought, what a creative and wonderful, and it's been really nice as parents not sort of trying to stop yourself from saying those little tiny things that can have such a big impact and crush.
Exactly. But you're so aware, Dan. You're so aware that I'm so impressed because it is, looking back for all the women I've worked with, it can be one comment like, your bum's on show and that, whatever it is that will crush a woman for the rest of her life. So it's like you don't want it to be too much of a minefield, but it is, it's not a question of stepping on eggshells, but it's just sort of not paying too much attention to it, I guess.
Yeah, I know it is scary. Well, that's parenting, and that's across the board, right? It could be not just fashion; it's all sorts of things. You just don't want to. But of course, we will do, because that's the nature of it. But it will be a comment that you just don't even remember. But I know.
And so, looking back in history, which era, or do you think was had the most interesting or amazing fashion? Well, there,
my spirit animal, or whatever the hell the expression is. So some people just look amazing. That they get united with the fashion of a certain era, and you're just like, holy shit! You just stepped out of a. And there was this wonderful friend of mine at university called Kate, and she just realised that she was like 1920s. That incredible. She had the body, she had the look. It's odd to say, but she had the kind of, even her skin that was from that period, because she didn't tan, for example. So she's not exactly. So usually she's like, oh god, it's so embarrassing, I don't tan. Instead, but she just put on the kind of amazing, the head with the little jeweled things that come down here. That I don't know what they're called, and she even could dance brilliantly. And she was like, she just wore it all the time because she realised it really worked for her. And so I discovered that I'm just 18th century naval officer, like pirate captain. I mean, that's just my thing. And to the extent that whenever I go to a fancy dress party, I just wear that, no matter what the dress code is, because I know that it's just what I'm meant. The massive billowy shirts with the ruffle up the front, the funny trousers that come quite high, but are very tight, because obviously they're kind of very tight on the thigh and the bum. And then the tailed coat, the
tailcoat,
the tailcoat with the exactly, and then the waistcoat that crushes it all in, and it just suits me, and I love it, and I wear it all the time.
But do you think that was? I mean, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but in which do you think was a sort of pivotal time in fashion in history where?
God, I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of it, like today,
was there the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution, a kind of fashion revolution?
Wow, that's very interesting, isn't it? I don't know the answer to that. I suspect it's got to do, like with our culinary revolution, and indeed the Industrial Revolution, is going out around the world and finding incredible stuff that you can suddenly wear. So a great example is the French explorers, imperialists, went to Canada, and Canada was freezing cold, nothing much there. No one particularly liked it, but it was amazing for beavers. And they just committed a sort of genocide on the beaver population. Every single person in Europe wore beaver skin, hats, scarf, like things around the neck. And it was just this astonishing fashion explosion. And so I do think that, I think that, again, it was around about, the industrial, it's discovering new dyes, new materials. Just as we were discovering things like pepper and nutmeg, your range of things that you were able, the materials, discovering the extraordinary world-class textile industry in Bengal that the British then destroyed. But before they destroyed it, they imported tons of those And I've been to the V&A and made programs with the experts there, and they show the muslins and the silks and everything, and the light cottons. And so I do think it's probably once you're able to access the global talent, global raw materials, you're obviously your dress can
That's
become,
when yes, that's so true. And so then, like, you know, you've travelled not in search of silks and muslins, but a lot. So do you have a comfort blanket that you take with you everywhere? Is there something, it needn't be a piece of clothing, something that you cherish that always comes with you?
Well, do you know what? This is the thing about social media. I used to take this like sort of silly old Indiana Jones hat because I had this like cosplay. Anyone who makes history programs thinks they're Indiana Jones, and anyone who tells you that that's not true is lying. That is just from senior academics to complete jokers like me who have no business being there, right? And I had a little Indiana Jones hat like everybody else, and I loved it. I took it everywhere. And then Twitter came along, and I watched foolishly checked the Twitter feed and on what people were saying about the program, and loads of people just said, "God, that hat's so pathetic. What a total loser!" And I never wore it again. And that's social media for you, man. And they may have been representative, they may have not, but I did think, you know what? It is quite weird. It's quite affected that I'm doing that. So I used to carry my little beloved hat, my wide-brimmed hat, all around the world. So comfort blanket, yeah, I think that's probably
it.
Probably it, really. Yeah.